my pleasure to introduce Erin Kinsey. She's with Landon's Greenhouse, and she's here to talk to us about starting plants from seed. And so if you've been in track 2 the whole time, this is just building perfectly. And so we're at the planting stage. So go ahead, Erin.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of talk basic seed starting. So I hope do we have more advanced, or is basic kind of what we're looking for? Just tips and tricks. It's going to be a lot of information. It's not something that's really that difficult, but I'm just going to give you a lot of tips to hopefully let you guys be successful. So I'm the production manager at Landon's. So also I don't usually have a slideshow, so I might be in the way a lot. So just let me know. We're going to learn together on this one, because I don't usually do this, but I thought it would be good. So anyways, I'm the production manager over at Landon's. So I spend my time making the seed schedules over there. My winter is full of planning, figuring out seed dates, all of that kind of stuff for all of the vegetables, herbs, some of the perennials, and all the annuals that we sell. We grow in-house, so it's a big task in the winter to get that all figured out. So I guess I'll just get started. Is everybody local, pretty much? Okay, so we've got Landon's Greenhouse is just kind of across the college there, and a couple years back, we had a production move. Our production was located at a different area or in a different location than our store was. And we decided that it would be beneficial to move production to the store location. And with that move, we had a lot of trial and error kind of stuff. So I'm going to kind of put that into the talk as well, just to kind of show you that mistakes are fine. And it is a lot of trial and error to figure out what you need in your own space. So mistakes are fine. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So your benefits of starting seeds indoors, especially here, as it extends your growing season, because we have a really short growing season here in Sheridan. So the Farmer's Almanac says our last frost date's May 27th. The first frost is September 18th, which gives us a 113-day growing season. There are several things that their days to harvest is beyond that 113 days. So that's the benefit of starting seeds indoors, is you can try some longer season varieties because they get their start inside. Because if you just do directly outside, you'll probably never get a harvest. And then what's the point of a garden if you don't get a harvest? You can harvest earlier also because they'll get a good start. You can get your tomato plants flowering before you even put them in the ground, so you'll get your harvest way sooner. Save money. Seed packs are way cheaper than buying seed starts. You can get a pack of seeds for $2, $3, whereas each vegetable start can sometimes be $5. So it's just a way to save some money also and keep your seeds throughout the years. Well, it's incredibly rewarding. That's the other thing. It feels so much better to pick a vegetable from a plant that you started from seed. It just feels really good. You nurtured it all through its growth, and now you're eating it. It just feels really, really good. What do you need to start seeds indoors? You need a plan, for one. Plan out your garden. This is a picture of my mom's garden plans, actually, from 2022. I don't plan my garden, and I recommend that you do, because I overfill mine every year. And so you can do it that way. It's a little chaotic, but a plan. So these are her beds. She kind of laid out, based on seed packs and the information on your sheet, the spacing that she needed. She laid it all out so she knew exactly when it was time to plant where things were going to go and the space that they needed. And what do you want to grow? We have a lot of people come in and ask us what they should plant in their garden, and it's truly as simple as, what do you want to eat? I'm mostly focusing on vegetables here, flowers too, but there's no sense growing anything you don't want to eat. I've learned that it's not worth my time to grow zucchini. I like zucchini, but not that much, and I have no problem buying a zucchini from the store. Also, you probably know somebody who has more zucchini than they need, so I don't waste the space in my garden anymore growing zucchini because I just don't love it enough. I use most of my space for tomatoes because tomatoes are one of my favorites. So truly the answer to that question is, grow what you want to eat. You're going to need a growing medium, something to start your seeds in. If you're going to do a soil route, you're going to want something that says, so I brought this one, a seed starter mix, something that says propagation mix, something that says germination mix. You can start seeds in a regular potting mix, but they'll do much better in a seed start mix. I meant to get pictures with different words, but I didn't. They both say seed starting mix, but prop mix, germination mix are also words you can use. The picture's kind of hard to tell, so I did bring samples. This is the seed start mix. and this is the just regular potting soil. You can tell the difference in the way that they look, and I'll kind of pass these around if people want me to, and you can feel the difference in the textures, or you can come up after. So I'll just kind of show you. This is the seed starting mix. You can tell it's much, much finer than a potting mix. And you want something really fine. You don't want something that's going to be chunky, because sometimes seeds, like a peppermint seed, itty bitty. And so if it's a really chunky mix, it's going to get lost in that soil and it's not going to be able to germinate. You'll never get your peppermint. So you want something really fine textured. You also don't need any additional fertilizer in your seed start mix, because your seed has everything it needs in order to germinate. It doesn't need anything else. Once it sprouts, then you can start to fertilize, but you don't need to do anything when they're seeding. We water all of our seedlings with plain water, all of our seed table with plain water, and that's fine. Another reason you want something fine is you don't want them to have to like push to try to grow up. You want them to just be able to nicely push through the soil. You want it to just easily be able to push its way through. You don't want it to have to fight. So a nice seed start mix is very, very fine. And then you can move it up into a regular potting soil. Other options are these little peat disc thingies. You just put your seed in the hole, water them, and they expand, or expand them and then put your seed in the hole. But those guys are awesome. There's other methods. We just use seed, but you can use those cocoa core bricks. There's a ton of different ways to start your seeds. Oh no, see, this is where I get off track. Fine texture soils, yes. Containers, you're gonna need containers to start your seeds, and that truly can be anything. You can use something like this, which we call like an open flat. You can buy little pots. You just wanna make sure you do have drainage, or you have to be really careful with your watering, because we don't wanna overwater our stuff. So little pots, a lot of people keep their eggshells and seed in their eggshells. We have a gal on property that's gonna keep her K-cups from her coffee machine, because they've already got a hole in them. She already has them. So really you don't need to spend very much money on starting your own seeds. Really the only thing you have to buy would be probably the soil and the seeds. You can do things, use whatever you have around the house, as long as it's clean. Clean is key, because we don't want anything in there that could disturb your seedlings, any disease, fungus, anything like that. So if you are using something that you've used before, like a recycled pot, do clean it with bleach water. Make sure it's sanitized before you start anything in it. If it's plastic, seed disc, egg, shells, yeah, really anything you have on property that will hold soil, hold water, drain, and hold a seed. Anything. Also, identification markers. This is one that I think sometimes gets overlooked just because you just don't think about it, but I've had several people come to me sometimes and they're like, what did I plant? I'm like, I don't know. So, yeah. So if it's big enough, I can tell, but when it's just the little cotyledons, I'm like, you got me. So it's anything, truly, this is anything also. You can buy little sticks to write on, tape, you can tape your pots, write directly on the pots, popsicle sticks. But it's really important to mark what you planted. And to put on your identification markers, right, what you planted, the date that you planted it, the date it was sown, and any other information that you think you need. Quantity, if you're doing more than one, so you can kind of see what your germination rate was. Because if you don't mark how many and if you planted 5, one comes up, but you didn't mark that you planted 5, you might not know that that didn't go very well. And then anything else you want in there. And you want the date for sure, because most things, for the most part, will germ in a couple of weeks. So if it's been a month or 2 months and you still don't have a seedling, depending on what it is, start over. So you don't want to wait forever and ever and ever, because then there's no point of starting your seeds early, because it'll be time to plant before you get anything. So identification markers are key. And then heat source lights, humidomes, are kind of optional, but they are very beneficial. So humidome is one of these. And this is one thing, if you seed, sometimes lettuce in the store comes in like a clam case, like a clamshell thing. Those are great because you can put soil in the bottom and then you have your humidome already attached. So what the humidome does is it traps moisture in there to keep it nice and humid. It also traps the heat, and it helps keep a consistent temperature. because of the air temperature changes a lot, but with this humidome on, it just traps everything in there. So it keeps it a nice, consistent temperature, which is what your seedlings want. They don't want a ton of variation in temperatures. So that's the benefits of a humidome. Lights, as long as you have bright light or a window, you should be able to germinate your seeds. Lights come in handy. There are certain things that do need additional light to germinate. Your seed packets will tell you that, probably. But as long as you have bright light, you're fine. And a heat source is also very helpful. We put almost everything we seed at Landon's on a heated seed bench. We keep it about 68 is what we look for. 65 to 75 is usually where a seedling is going to want to germinate. So a heat source is great, but you want to make sure you monitor that and it's not too hot, because you will cook your seeds and then you won't get any germination. So a heat source, you can buy them online, just little heating pads to set your trays on or your pots. But definitely monitor it. That was with our big production move. That was something that an issue that we really ran into, because for 40 years, 30 years, 35 years, they were up there. It was like a well-oiled machine. We didn't have to do anything different. We just knew what to do. We moved down here, different location, greenhouses were in a different direction. We cooked entire crops of seeds, gone, because we left our humidomes on. So now we know to take humidomes off during the day, but we were having really, really poor germ, things were failing. We stuck a thermometer under the humidome into the soil and it was over 100 degrees. Whoops. So we learned to take humidomes off and really monitor that. So it is a lot of, once you figure it out, you've got it, and you probably don't need to make changes. But definitely you're gonna have to monitor what's going on to kind of get a feel for it. And now we know. We also introduced a shade cloth, so that keeps the temperature a lot cooler where the seedlings are, and it's not as intense to cook the little seedlings once they sprout. So heat mats can be beneficial if used correctly. Otherwise, they can cause you to fail, and we don't want that. But it's okay to fail, also. Time to start seeding. Gosh, I'm talking really fast. Sorry, guys. Try to cool it. So, your seed packs are gonna be your best friend. This is actually, I brought this seed pack with me. It's some sweet peas, and I specifically chose this one because there are special requirements for germination. Not every seed can just immediately be spread and you'll expect germination. So your seed packs, be sure you read your seed pack. So on the front, first of all, it says annual full sun to part shade, so it gives you information about where the plant will live and more information, but special germination instructions. Soak seed in water 12 to 24 hours or nick the seed. We soak ours and that helps, but you can nick it with like little groomers, nail clippers. Basically, sweet peas have a really, really hard seed coat, and that needs to be broken in order for it to break dormancy, or it's just gonna sit in your soil and have no idea that it's time for it to grow. So you gotta make sure it knows, oh, it's time. So either one of those, nicking or soaking, will work. And then it says darkness aids germination. That is also key, because that was something we learned at Landon's. We have a seeder, we switched seeders, and in our information books, which I should have brought, but at the top of every page, we have information for every seed that we plant. Germination tips, temperatures, all of that stuff. But the seeder we'd had worked there for 20 years, and so she just had stuff in her head that she knew to do, and it wasn't written down. So when we transferred seeders, those things weren't getting done, and we were having huge failures on our sweet pea germination, huge. And then she remembered, Deb said, I think I remember Judy germing those in the dark. And so we seeded in an open flat, just like this, full of soil, and we took another one of these flats and put it over the top. Game changer. They came up like mad, almost 100% germ. So these are real. These tips really mean something. So definitely follow what it says on your seed pack. There are other things that need darkness. Sweet peas are one, rosemary is another. Also pay attention to, and I didn't see a seed pack, I think, that said it, but there are certain things, we keep all of our perennial seeds in the fridge. Because if you think about outside, they have to go through a cold period in order for them to germ. So we keep all of our seeds in the fridge, and that is something that breaks their dormancy, is they stay cold, and then when we take them out and seed them, they think it's springtime, and so they'll germinate. And there are some things that need to freeze. So our rosemary, our garden sage, those things we keep in the freezer until it's time to plant. Same with pansies and violas. They reseed themselves, but even so, at the end of the year, when they make their seed heads and spill them all over the ground, they go through a winter, and then they germinate the next spring. So there are also cold stratification is what that's called. So there are seeds that need that. So scarification I talked about is nicking the seed, light or dark. Things, sometimes packets will say surface sow, and that means do not cover it with soil. It needs as much light as it can get. And so you truly just sprinkle it. And it feels funny to not cover it with soil, but don't. If it says surface sow, just leave it on the surface and it'll figure it out. That's what it wants. And then complete darkness. If your seed is old, like I said, you can buy seeds and use them year to year until they're gone. Every year that your seed is old, we would recommend germing twice as many. You're going to double sow every time your seed is old just because their viability goes down. But you can still use it. So always seed extra. Read your seed packets. That's the biggest takeaway from that slide, is just that's going to tell you everything you know. I guess I'll also talk about this. So there are other resources. You can always use the internet, but the internet's also full of everything. So make sure you're reading from like an extension or a .org or something that's good. But there's also, we use this a lot. If we have a new variety coming in at Landon's, I use this book. It's any culture information. So this is a ball culture book. And it will tell you everything you need to know. So we'll just pull up, I don't know if I have, what did I say? Sweet pea. Well, let me just see what it says. Maybe. So the way this works, Lathyrus, don't know if that's how you say it, but that's the Latin for sweet pea. So it's right here, all across this page. It tells me, it's more, this book specifically is more for a growing facility because it tells you how long it takes until it's a finished sellable plant. But it tells the typical germination rate, 65 to 75. Another note, sorry I'm pinging around a little bit. Most seed packs you buy in the store don't tell you germ rates because they're not really tested for that. The seed packs we buy will give me a germ rate. If your seed packet does have a germ rate and it's 60%, 65% or below, double sow. Also seed twice as many, because that's basically saying only 60% of the seeds you plant are going to germinate. So you want to double it to make sure you actually make crop. So keep that in mind. This is another thing for this book. So reading that, I just already know, regardless of what my seed pack says, I'll probably seed extra, just because that's what Ball, who does seeds, thinks. So that's what I'll do. Tells you temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Ooh. Fahrenheit, 65 to 72 degrees. That's why you want the heat source. It tells you whether you want to cover the seed or not. This says yes, which means a soil cover. Sometimes it will say lightly cover. Anyways, it basically tells you everything you need to know to have success. So culture information is great. A lot of that's just available online, or you could probably find a book somewhere. Oh, I forgot that side. Decide when you want to plant outside. That's that handout I gave you. If you guys didn't get one, I'm out, but I will, when they post this, I will have those linked so you can print it. So vegetables on one side, herbs on the other. It tells you, thank you, it tells you row spacing, when to start your seeds indoors, and it very kindly says beans, when to start indoors, don't. And that's because there are a lot of things that you don't want. They do way better directly sown into the ground. And a lot of those are going to be your roots, your root kind of vegetables, like your corn. Wow, nope, forget that, not corn. Carrots is what I meant. Oh boy. Carrots, turnips, radishes, things that you're going to eat the root that don't transplant very well. They do way better in the ground. And a lot of things, yeah, mostly it's the root vegetables. And that is true. Don't start them early because they won't transplant very well into the ground. Speaking of corn, I don't know what it says on there for corn actually. Oh, see, it does say that you can. Corn's a tough one because oftentimes corn doesn't transplant very well because you have to do it in the right period of time. Corn gets a really big taproot and it doesn't like that to be disturbed. So if it's starting to grow that big root, it's not going to transplant very well. So corn is best to do direct. But it's also knee-high by the 4th of July. Sometimes that can be tough. So you just have to be careful if you're starting your corn indoors. Transplant it before it's too big. So 4 to 8 weeks prior to transplant date. So there are certain things that you can put out earlier, and on this sheet it should tell you like it's going to be your cool weather crops, like your cabbages, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, lettuces, spinach. There are cool weather crops that can handle a lot more cold and a little bit of a frost. Well, maybe not frost, they can handle the cold. And those are the things that you can plant starting in April, which is nice because you can start your seeds way earlier. Like right now we're selling broccolis and cabbages and all those things because they can go in the ground almost now. But there are things, so 4 to 8 weeks prior to transplant. Tomatoes are something tomatoes are weenies. I love them, but they don't like cold at all. But if you want to get a head start, you can use things like walls of water around your tomatoes and your peppers, things that are a little bit more delicate. These protect them from that cold and that frost. So you can get them in the ground a little bit earlier. I would honestly wait until it's frost-free because then you don't have to worry. And usually Memorial Day weekend is the day that we tell everybody you're safe. Because I think that said May 27th. We usually just say wait until Memorial Day weekend, then you can put anything in the ground. Basically, I think it says at the top of that too, you want to wait till the soil temperature is 55. One year we had, I can't remember when it was, but the air temperature was warm, but the ground wasn't thawing. And a lot of people were having issues with their plants because the ground wasn't warm yet. So they'd plant their cucumbers and they just stalled. They didn't do a dang thing because the soil was too cold. 55. So prepare your soil and your containers. If your containers haven't been cleaned and you're reusing a plastic, go ahead and clean them. And then you want to start with damp soil. And this, typically a good moisture content, and this goes for your soil outside too for your trees and shrubs. Typically a good moisture content is when you squeeze your soil, give it a fist, not like really hard, but just give it kind of a squeeze. And if you open your hand and it kind of stays together, this could probably use a little bit more moisture, but if it holds a form, that's a good soil moisture content. If you squeeze it and it's just dust when you open your hand and doesn't hold any kind of shape, add more moisture. And if you squeeze it and it's dribbling down your arm, way too much water, add more dry soil. So that's what you want kind of for moisture content. So you want to start with your seed start mix damp, partially because it's so fine. If it's literally dust when it's dry. And I don't know if you guys have probably watered some dry plants and the water just sits on top. And so you don't want that because you've spent a long time perfectly placing your seeds and then you water and it just pools up and then they go all over the place. So you want to make sure you start with damp soil. It's a lot easier to water them in. It's just better. So start with damp soil.
Should just spray them instead of...
Yeah, you could use a spray can or...
Yeah.
You know, or if you, yes, if you're using a watering can, I think they have that later, I would recommend one with a shower head, not a spout, because spouts tend to drill holes, whereas a shower is much gentler, and you don't want to be knocking your seeds around or drill them in the soil. That defeats the purpose of being careful. So start with damp soil, and then you'll fill your container, whatever it is. I'll fill this guy up. This is how we do it at Landon's. So we overfill it, and then you're going to want to give it one tap. I'm making a mess up here. Like one gentle tap, and you just see how it settled. You want to make sure you're getting all that excess air out of there before you plant, because if you don't, and you plant and then you water in, again, you're going to get this surface because it's going to then get rid of all those air bubbles. So give it one tap, but you don't want to boom, 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 boom. You don't want to make it concrete, because that'll defeat the purpose of the fine soil, and your seedling will have to fight. And then you just kind of scrape it off, and that's kind of how we fill pots. Then, let's see, where am I now? Gently level the soil. We will also, that kind of leveled it, but we also have little things because we seed in these. So I'll fill this up, and it's just, you can see your seeds better if you have a really nice level surface. So we have little things that fit in here, and we just very gently, so it is 100% level. That's really nice to be able to do that. So that's preparing your soil. And then disperse seeds, the methods, lots of different methods. By hand is usually the easiest, depending on what it is. Because like peppermint seeds, for example, you can't see them. So that is difficult to try to, in your hand, pick up one and place it. That one you could just kind of spread and then thin later. But you can do it by hand if they're big seeds. Use your seed packet, kind of just rip a hole if you know how many and just kind of wiggle it and they'll gently fall. Vibrating hand seeder, these are available online. That's where I got this. This is what we use a lot. You've got a dial here, this is where you put your seeds, and it vibrates. So really you just put your seeds on there and it just wiggles them off really nicely onto the soil. That way you get nice even lines and things aren't stacked on top of each other. So this is just really nice and and it's perfect. We've also, before we got these, we had an old shaver with a piece of paper duct taped to it. Same thing. Turned it on and it vibrated. So you can do that if you want. Seed tape, this is more for direct sowing, but it's important. Seed tape, this is going to be for your things that need to be direct sown. Carrots, radishes, spinach, those things. This just takes any thought out completely. And it says seed tape there on the top, seed tape. Perfect rows, even spacing. It even says it on the package. You just undo it, lay it out, done. You have no thinking about how far apart your seeds need to be, which is kind of great.
And then you don't have to thin, too.
Yes, no thinning, yeah. Because sometimes if you direct, things get a little out of hand. Carrots, usually I just open the packet and pour, and then I'm thinning constantly. And thinning can be a dangerous game too if you're overseeding. Thinning, you take out, thinning meaning if you have a really dense clump, it's not healthy for the seedlings, so you take some out. But the problem with that is I don't want to throw those away. So then all of a sudden I only wanted 5 plants, now I have 15 because I couldn't throw those seedlings away. So thinning can be kind of a dangerous game to play if you love plants. Any other methods? Anyway, there are tools. I've never used one of these before, but this is a dial seed sower. Don't know how that works, but there are so many methods. But you have hands, so you have hands and you have paper at home if you need. That's the easiest way to do it. So after you've sown your seed and you've known whether it needs a soil cover, this isn't a specific rule, but it's kind of a good thing to think about. Unless something says to not cover it, a good amount of coverage, because a lot of times people plant things too deep and they can't figure out where to go, what to do. So it's similar to bulbs. A bulb, you're going to plant 1 to 2 times as deep as the size of the bulb. That makes sense? So similar thing with seeds. A big pumpkin seed, I'm going to want to cover that pretty heftily. A tiny, tiny peppermint seed, you don't want to give it too much because then it's just going to get lost. So kind of just think about the size. That's not like 100% the rule, but just something to kind of think about. The size of the seed, cover it equal-ish. So watering in your seeds is very important. I know we started with damp soil, but you're going to want to water them in. And this is where I said a shower head watering can is better. Or if you have the setup with a hose, definitely use the shower head feature on the water wand. And always, always, always water spray bottles especially, or if you're using the mist dial. Some people at Landon's like to use the mist. I prefer the shower head. Water from above. Like this is, pretend this is my hose. Like this. Water right from above, just directly down onto the soil, especially with the mist or a spray bottle, because there's so much pressure behind that. If I'm going at this angle, I am blasting those seeds off. And we've run into that at Landon's before, where we were just, and all of the seeds germed on one end of the tray, because there's so much pressure. So always, always, always water above. Gives you a good shoulder workout at the same time. So, spray bottles are a good way to kind of control how much water you're using. Plain water is fine. Seed has all the nutrients it needs to germ. And you want to keep your seedlings moist, not wet. We don't want them to dry out. And thinking about too, you'll know kind of where in your flat or your pot your seed is. So if my seed is way down here and the top is dry, it's probably okay because there's still moisture below. But if my seed is sown straight on top, I'm going to have to keep that a little bit damper, because if it starts to germ and dries out, it will fail. So you want to make sure you keep them moist, not wet. And my kind of analogy, sorry, I keep standing right in front of you guys. My wet versus moist, damp analogy is, think of a paper towel. When somebody asks you for a damp paper towel, you will wet the paper towel and you will wring it out, but there's still moisture in the paper towel. If they ask for a wet paper towel, you wet it and you let it be soppy. That's kind of what you want. You always want moist soil, not wet soil. Does that kind of make sense? Gives you kind of a feel for what you're looking for in your soil.
So how often would you do it? How do you tell without messing around?
Without digging around in there. You'll get kind of used to your own situation. Sunnier days, you're going to want to water more. Cloudy, rainy days, probably not. I might not water my seedlings today because they're not. If the color of the soil is changing, you can kind of tell the difference between a wet versus a dry soil. And if you're getting kind of a crusty layer on top, probably time to water because all that moisture is gone and it's solidifying together. So it's kind of dependent on your specific conditions, but you'll get kind of a feel for it, yeah. And even if you need to, kind of stick your finger in the side and feel if there's moisture in there, and you'll know where your seeds are. Cover your seedling with a humidome. Pop that baby on top. Again, that's not 100% necessary, but it's very, very helpful. You'll notice a difference if you have seeded before and not used a humidome. If you start, you will really tell a difference. It just happens really fast. Allows for an even keel environment, meaning humidity, heat, moisture doesn't change very often. Traps humidity and warmth. Place your containers then on the heat mat. I already talked about that a little bit. Heat mat helps keep a consistent temperature. Pre and post germination. So through the whole process, you're going to want to monitor your soil temperature, just even by feel. If it feels warm to you, it's probably very warm. So monitor with your humidomes. You don't want to cook them. And then once you have probably 50% up and germinated, you probably don't have to worry about putting your humidomes on anymore, because once the seedlings germinate and you trap them with the humidome, they'll start to stretch. So definitely once you've germinated, remove humidomes and don't put them back on. Airflow is also crucial to seed starting, because I was helping somebody with their seed starting at their own house, and they were doing it in a basement with grow lights. That's great use of space. But it got very musty and damp, and they were having a lot of failure, a lot of fungal issues. So I had her put some fans up, got that air moving. Things turned out a lot better after we got that airflow going. Corners of our greenhouses, we always have fans going because there's no airflow. They just get mossy, algae-y, so airflow is definitely important. Damping off is one thing that is very common in seed starting, and that's a fungal issue. So that could be too wet of conditions, not a lot of airflow, and that's when you have your seedling sprouted and it rots right at the base. And there's really no coming back from that. So be sure to have airflow and not keep you want humid, but you don't want too humid. So it's finding a balance there. If you have a heat source, you're also going to want to remove your seedlings probably once 50% have germed. That's about when we do it, because that will cause stretching in your plants. If there's too much heat, they'll get long and leggy, and we want short, stocky, strong plants. And when they're seedlings, you can kind of bury them. You can get away. A lot of plants you can't bury when they're big because you'll choke them and they'll suffocate and die. So seedlings you can often bury. Tomatoes specifically, that's how we get stocky plants, is all of the hairs on the tomato stem, once those are underground, those turn into roots. So when we do our tomatoes at Landon's, we will move them up potentially 3 times. And every time we do, boop, we sink them right to their armpits. Every time. So if my seedling is this big and the leaves are up here, I'm going to bury it right to its armpits. Does that make sense? Because that's how the trenching works. A lot of people with tomatoes, if you have a really leggy, stringy tomato, you can trench it, lay it on its side, and then it will grow up. That's basically the same thing. It's just an easier way than digging a hole that's 3 feet deep. You can just lay it on its side and it'll pop up. And that's how we get those big, stocky, sturdy stems on your tomatoes. Off topic a little bit, but leggy plants is often a cause, if they're seedlings, too much heat or lack of light. And If you have stringy, leggy plants, it's because you're not giving them enough light. And legginess, if you don't know what that means, basically on a stem, everywhere a leaf is shooting out is called a node, and the stem between is the inner node. And if those are stretching, they're searching for light. So we want tight, tight inner nodes is what we want. Just a thought, just something. So if you have really stretchy inner nodes, you're not giving it enough light. You can solve that problem on a tomato, you can't solve that problem on other things. Back on track. Provide sufficient light. So once they've germed, you're gonna want light for sure. I had on my notes, try for 16 hours. That's a lot. You don't need that much, because we don't do supplement light really unless the seedling calls for it at Landon's, and our things are fine. So you don't need it. But if you do have lights, grow lights need to be closer than you think. If you have your grow lights way up here, they're probably not benefiting from it. So you want them 2 to 4 inches away, and then as your plant grows, you want to move the light up with it. And then eventually, once they're nice plants, you shouldn't need light. And then thin your overcrowded containers. So transplanting seedlings, if you've seeded into an open flat like this, or an eggshell, or even a small pot, you're going to want to make sure, before we even transplant outside, you're going to want to give your seedling space to grow larger. So we typically wait to move anything up until, this isn't for everything, but typically until one set of true leaves is visible. And what I mean by that is when your seed sprouts, you're going to see 2 little leaves. Those are cotyledons. Those aren't true leaves. So we will wait. I have little guys here. These are pansies. And I was going to try to show you. We did move these up a little earlier than. Okay. And that's just me. You don't have to do that, but that just means it's stocky enough that it will probably survive when you transplant it. So these 2 bigger leaves here, those are the cotyledons. But if you guys can see the smaller leaves, that's a set of true leaves. So that's how I know it's time to transplant. And they're like a tomato or a basil. This is harder to tell because both are kind of round. But a tomato, you're going to get these cotyledons. They're kind of stringy. As soon as a real tomato leaf pops out, that's when you can transplant them up to their armpits. Yeah. So that's a good time to move them up. Move them up gradually in pot size also. And this, if you're going outside, that's not usually an issue because you don't want to put a seedling this size in a pot this big. That is going to be tough for that seedling to survive. Mostly because people tend to be overwaterers just in general, not underwaterers. And too much water will kill your seedlings. If you put them in a pot this big, even just like 3 little seedlings, that is so much extra moisture for them that they don't need. Because they're only at the top, but you're going to keep them moist, you're going to have to keep watering and watering and watering and watering. So the bottom is going to be so saturated. It's just not necessary. And typically plants will work on their roots first, so before they push a lot of upper growth. So if I put this in here, it's not going to take him quite as long to fill up this tiny space for him to then start pushing growth up top, as opposed to if I put him in a big pot. So slowly size up your transplants. Definitely, we shouldn't be dealing with too big of plants. My sister-in-law got over anxious one year. Squash, squash germinates so fast. Don't worry about starting your squash too early. She started them so early, it was the entire counter. She had blossoms on it. We were like, whoa, cool it. So squash is one that you don't really have to start that early, but hopefully we're not dealing with gigantic plants, but definitely still move them up slower. It's just better for the seedling. Plant seedlings deep, tomatoes especially, yeah. Yes?
How often do you move them up before you want to be transplanted outside?
At least once out of their seed tray, I'd say. But if they start to, if you move up to this and you feel that they have rooted really bad, I would do it again. At least one more time. So 1 to 2 times, I would say. Kind of depending on how early you've gone versus when you can plant it outside. Because we want to start with a healthy plant. So if he's been really, really root bound, it's not going to be very beneficial then to put him in the ground because he's going to shock. They're probably going to shock anyways, but that's next, I think. But just make sure you monitor that, I guess. Fertilizer. So you can, once they germinate, you can start using fertilizer. When they're still tiny, tiny seedlings, I would use a half-strength fertilizer because they're so delicate. Too much fertilizer can actually burn your plants. So you have to be careful with over-fertilization. So using just a half-strength would be fine. Give them a little bit of food, but nothing over the top, and that will also help them. When it comes to your fertilizers, there are those 3 numbers on your fertilizers, if you guys have seen that. I should have put that up here. I don't have any. But usually, there's 3 numbers, so it's a 15, 15, 15. That's going to be a balanced fertilizer. If it has a high middle number, which is like our blossom boost, that's going to push bloom. So the first number, nitrogen, that's focusing mostly on your foliar growth, nice, fresh, green, nice, healthy growth. And then the middle number is your blooms. Last number is kind of roots overall growth. So something with nitrogen would be good, I guess. But really a balanced fertilizer. They have specific fertilizers for vegetable gardens and specific things. But just a 20-20-20, 15-15-15 is fine. It's still food, and your plant will like it. So when it's time to transplant seedlings outside, you're going to want to harden off your plants before moving directly into the ground or beds. And that's because specifically if they've been grown in like a greenhouse or a really, really even climate, they have no idea about the big bad world out there. So you put them out, first of all, we're going to rip them from their pot, bust up their roots, put them in the ground. That's going to be shocking enough. And then it might be windy, and they're not going to know what that is. So you just really want to expose them to conditions outside. So a week is usually plenty to harden things off, but start putting them on your covered patio, expose them to more light slowly, give them a breeze, give them a temperature change. Bring them in again at night just so they kind of get a feel. They'll shock less. You can go directly in the ground, but you'll probably get a shock and they'll be wilty for a little bit until they realize life's okay, and then they'll be fine. So slowly expose them. More light, wind, temperature change. Prepare them for the big bad world. That's it.
Thank you for watching the University of Wyoming's Extension Office presentation. And thank you to our partners and sponsors.